Good morning, everybody. Just want to share this message with you. This is the first message from my office in this series called The You Effect. And I want to kick off today by starting with you thinking of the most fun friend that you've ever had. Don't say their name out loud unless you're in the room by yourself. Just picture them in your mind, the most fun friend that you have. Got it? Good. When I think about my most fun friend, I always think about Kevin. He was this guy in high school. He was always cracking jokes. He was doing crazy stuff. He was playing pranks, making everybody laugh so hard that they were gasping for air. He never really made fun of people, though. He just made sure everybody was having fun all the time. I loved that about Kevin. In fact, anytime that we would sign up for field trips, I would always scan the list to see if Kevin was going, because if he was there was zero chance of it being boring. And years later, I learned that lots of people did that. People signed up if Kevin signed up. And what's most crazy is if Kevin had zero idea that he had that kind of effect on the people around him. He was just being his normal, ridiculous self. And I'm guessing you probably have a friend like that. Somebody that has a huge effect on the people around them, whether they know it or not. Maybe you know someone that is so fun to be around that everybody wants to hang out with them. Maybe you know someone that is so nice they literally make you want to be a nicer person. Maybe you know someone that works so hard that his or her teammates work harder because of them. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe you know some people that are so mean that other people always feel on edge around them. Maybe you know some people that are always ticked off, so they kind of bring down the mood whenever you're around them. Maybe you know some people that are so loud literally people have to shout to talk over them. The whole room gets louder because they're in the room. Whether it's a good effect or a not so good effect, here's what's true about nearly everybody that has a significant effect on the people around them. You ready? They don't really think about the effect they're having on people. They either don't realize they have an effect, or they haven't put thought into how they could use their effect on people. And see, that's what makes this series that we're in so interesting and tricky. I mean, for the next few weeks, we're talking about the you effect, how you affect the people and the situations around you. In other words, we're talking about influence. For some of you, your influence is obvious. Maybe you hold some type of leadership position, either at church or at school, or you have friends and you understand people listen to you and almost always take your opinion seriously. Whether it's about something serious like who your friend should date, to something random like what Avenger you think is best. And there's no debate about it, it's Captain America, okay? But on the other hand, some of you may say, Shane, I just don't affect, impact, or influence anyone. I mean, the only person that I have influence over is my family's dog, and even he ignores me at times. Listen, you may think that you don't have any effect like my friend Kevin. I mean, people don't go anywhere or do anything because of you. You may think that, and you may think I'm not an influencer like at all, and I don't really want to be. But here's the deal. Either way, it's totally normal. And either way, the truth is this. No matter what you or I think about influence is always possible. Even probable that we don't realize how much you affect or me affect there really is, or what could happen because of the effect we have. So today we're going to look at someone who used what they had to affect others, even though they didn't have very much. It's recorded in one of the Gospels, which is one of the 4 books in the New Testament. In the second half of the Bible, it tells us about Jesus' life. What we're going to read today was recorded by John, who was one of Jesus' closest followers and students. In fact, when Jesus was on the cross, one of the last things Jesus did was ask John to care for his mother after he died. So we can read these words knowing that they were written by an eyewitness person who was trusted by Jesus. Now let me set the scene for you. When Jesus traveled around in his 3 years of ministry, crowds almost always followed. It could have been because they had heard about Jesus. Maybe they wanted healing for something. Maybe they were just curious about Jesus. But whatever the reason was, Jesus had a lot of influence and people were always around Jesus. This particular day was no different. In John chapter 6, verse 1 through 6, we're going to even read beyond that. But I want you to dial in John 6, verse 1, and we're going to start our reading there. It says, sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is, the Sea of Tiberias. And a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" Now pay attention to this. He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Do you see that? Jesus asks Philip, just to test him, just to see where he's at, hey, where shall we buy bread for these people to eat? Jesus already knew what he was going to do. He just wanted to see if his disciples had caught on yet. Imagine the scene. A large crowd's gathered to see the great miracle worker, Jesus. And what does Jesus do? Jesus asks one of his disciples, Philip, what they should do. And if I were Philip, I would have been like, hey Jesus, aren't you the miracle guy? I think this is your area of expertise, right? But instead, Philip responds this way. Philip answered him and said, it would take more than a half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. That's John 6, verse 7. In other words, Philip's like, man, you got to be kidding me. If we're going to feed everyone, there better be someone with a lot of cash around here to make that happen, which is a good point. I mean, can you imagine sending someone to McDonald's to order 5,000 Big Mac combos? Isn't that crazy? That's crazy. But the story continues. Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. This is what Simon Peter's brother, Andrew, said. Here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many people? How many people are there? It's 5,000 people. So apparently only one mom in the entire village packs a lunch for her son. And Andrew thought that this was worth pointing out. I mean, it was something in the crowd. And Jesus was fixing to do something with this that was going to be phenomenal. So this is when Jesus goes to work. Jesus says, have the people sit down. There was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. And when they had all enough to eat, he said to his disciples, gather the pieces that are left over, let nothing be wasted. So they gathered them, filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. And after the people saw the sign Jesus performed, they began to say, listen to this, surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world. Now listen, when I read this story, there's all kinds of questions that come up. Like this, was it a buffet style meal? Where did the baskets come from? How exactly did he turn 5 loaves and 2 fish into enough food to feed everyone? There's 5,000 plus people there. But here's maybe the most important question we need to ask. Not how did all those other things take place. Here's the most important question we need to ask. Who had the biggest impact in this story? Who had the biggest impact in the story? I mean, it's easy to see that Jesus had influence. He had lots of influence. I mean, by the end of this story, a large crowd was calling him a prophet because of the miracle that he had just performed. But then there's the disciples. I mean, they were impactful just because they were associated with Jesus. But the real superstar of the story may not be who you think it is. It's the boy with the lunch. Now, at first it seems like the opposite. How could a kid with some bread and fish be influential? But the truth is this, it wasn't the amount of what he had that allowed him to make a difference. It was his willingness to use what he had that made him influential. Y'all need to hear that today. It wasn't what he had that allowed him to make a difference. It was his willingness to use what he had, that made him be an influence. And this would have been an even bigger deal in the context that Jesus and the disciples were living in this day. I mean, children weren't valued at all. No one would have seen this boy as having influence, but that didn't stop that boy from stepping up. And it was his willingness to do it that ended up impacting thousands of people. Can you imagine how the conversation went with his mom when he got home that afternoon? I mean, there were thousands of people there, Mom, and they picked my lunch. No one, not even his mom, could have imagined things going that way. She wasn't packing his lunch that day thinking, maybe this lunch is going to impact thousands of people. That's not going through her mind. But it did. It impacted thousands of people. And thousands of years later, we're still telling this kid's story. And I bet this kid and everyone around this kid never thought influence like this would be part of his story. It didn't matter that he didn't take a stage. It didn't matter that he wasn't well known or in a position of leadership. It didn't matter that he wasn't a speaker or a preacher. It didn't matter that he wasn't a super athletic or popular or even an academic genius. He wasn't cool or interesting enough that the writer would tell us his name. Listen, Jesus wasn't looking for any of that, and he's not looking for any of that today. The only thing that mattered was that the boy brought all that he had, and it was enough. Because ultimately, this was about the power of Jesus and what Jesus was capable of doing through someone who was willing to be used just to offer what they had. And when it comes to you affecting the world around you, it's all about you being willing to show up and offer what you have. But before that's possible, you've got to recognize that you have more of an effect than you think. You've got to understand that. You've got more of an effect than you think. Imagine if the little boy listening to Jesus teach believed that he could have no effect on the situation. There would be no story to tell. In the same way, when we feel like we have nothing to bring to the table, that we don't have the potential to affect anything, there are so many stories and opportunities that we may be missing out on as a result. The way that we see influence needs to change, folks. It's time that we begin to realize that having influence and impact is really just being willing to do something with what you have, no matter how big, no matter how small what you have is. In other words, having an impact isn't about doing more. It's not about having more. It's not about knowing more. It's about offering what you already have to those around you. It's about choosing to believe, even when it seems unbelievable, that you have an effect on your friend group. You have an effect on your section of the band. You have an effect on your teammates. You have an effect on your siblings. You have an effect on your classmates. And then just imagine what God could do with the you effect in the world around you. Even if that feels impossible or it seems like you don't have a ton of effect, listen, just allow your mind to consider the possibility that what Jesus did with a little boy's lunch is something he can do with your influence. So as you think about it, here's a few steps to consider. Number one, identify the who. Who are the immediate people in front of you that you have the potential to influence? Who are those people? Who are the people closest to you? Maybe it's your siblings. Maybe it's a friend. Maybe it's a teammate or other people in your family. You've got to consider the who. Identify the who. Secondly, you need to identify the need. What is it that the people around you need? Is it encouragement? Is it time? Is it someone to listen to? Is it someone to help them with homework? Once you identify the who it is around you, identify the need, what it is that they need. What is it that they need? Thirdly, after you recognize the who, identify them and identify the need. Thirdly, you need to identify what you can do to help and then do it. This is where the rubber meets the road. Identify what you can do to help. Not someone else, but you. Identify what you can do to help and then do it. Now I want to flip this for a second. I want you to think about a person in your life who has affected you in a positive way. What was it about them that allowed them to have an impact on you? How did their influence impact your life for the good? Think about that. Think about that. Because in the same way that others have had an effect on you, you have the same ability to have an effect on others. Listen, that's why we have small groups. I mean, the people that you're around have an effect on you, and you have an effect on them, maybe even more than you think. So the question to ask yourself isn't, do I have the ability to impact others? Instead, the question should be, how will I use the influence that I already have? See, ultimately, God is the one who has the power to change people. All you have to do is show up, offer what you have, and let Him do the rest. I hope this helps you today. I hope you apply this to your life today. Identify the who, identify the need, and then identify what you can do about it, and then do it. It's simple, guys. It's not hard. Hope you've enjoyed this message. Catch up with week 2 next week. Join us Wednesday night, 6:30, as we get into small groups to discuss this further. And then Sunday night, we start week 2 of the You Effect. God bless you. Have a great day.